It's what we can do with competitive athletes. So you can profile someone and essentially estimate their risk. And you can say, well, okay, you might not have passed out now, but looking at this, if you get much stronger, we think you probably will. So let's address it.
Hi, Sinead. It's my pleasure to have you on Evidence Strong Show. Please briefly introduce yourself.
Hello. No, thanks for having me. So yeah, I'm Sinead. I am performance nutritionist and physiologist, and I work primarily, well, I've sort of always worked primarily in strength power sports, weight making sports, and kind of extreme ultra adventures. And yeah, now primarily in weightlifting, at least from the nutrition perspective. What I care about is kind of how the body works and how you get it to do what you want it to do.
Awesome. So today we are talking about weightlifters blackout. So let's start with some kind of definition.
Yeah, so typically on a clean and jerk, usually once the clean's been stood up or partially stood up before the jerk, someone passes out essentially, either completely and just fails backwards or just gets dizzy and has to drop the bar because, they're seeing stars and the world is swirling.
Why does it happen?
So in many ways, we don't know, but in that there's no there's no research out there that says these are the XYZ causes. What we've done is said, well, mechanistically, like if we think about how the body works, what could it be? And then if it does happen to someone regularly, cool, can we test those parameters, see what one it's likely to be, address it, and does it fix it? And what I'm going to take away for a moment is obviously just hitting your artery. That is going to send you out regardless. So that's a technique piece. But if we're thinking, no, technically you've done a lovely clean, but you've passed out, there are a few reasons when we think about how the body works and what it's doing when it does a clean that might be likely. So the first thing to think about, or maybe the main thing to think about, is when you are cleaning a near maximal weight, your lower body is working really hard. If you are a weightlifter, you have a lot of muscle relative to your total body size in your butt and in your legs, and they are doing that clean. And so what will happen in that situation is you get all the blood rushing to those working muscles because you're asking those muscles to do a huge amount of work, i.e. produce a massive amount of energy so that you can actually move that load. So you get a very high proportion of the blood into your butt and legs. So you have a lower proportion than normal going to your brain. Lack of oxygen to the brain is what causes you to pass out. So if we think about it like that, there are a few things that we think could be causing someone to be susceptible to that. The first, dehydration. If you are dehydrated, you have less blood volume. So if you've got less blood volume and most of that volume is going to your legs, even less is going to your brain, you're more likely to pass out. So dehydration, we think, is a major factor or potential factor. If someone has low blood pressure anyway, which can be a consequence of dehydration, but someone can have low blood pressure for other reasons. Again, this is not so much about blood volume, it's about their body's capacity to get it to their brain quickly. So someone does a clean, they stand up, they can't pump the blood to their brain fast enough, they pass out. Then on top of those two things, if someone is dehydrated and or has naturally low blood pressure, or both, they're definitely going to pass out. What will further delay that is, say someone has done a clean that's maybe not so pretty and they've grind it up. Again, a longer period of time with less blood and oxygen to the brain, more blood and oxygen to those working leg muscles, higher likelihood of passing out. So the time piece is important as well. Like how long are you stuck at the bottom with everything going to your leg muscles and your butt to be like, stand up, stand up, stand up, less and less potentially going to your brain. So then what can layer into that is something that we're looking at as well is your blood glucose levels. So low blood glucose or high blood glucose can potentially delay reaction times. Again, if you've got a delayed reaction time, which means that you are in the working part of the clean for longer, potentially less blood and oxygen to the brain, pass out. And again, some people are going to be more or less sensitive to this.
Why glucose levels will influence reaction time? How does it happen?
Because glucose powers the brain and glucose powers neurons and your movement depends on the nervous signals telling your legs, arms, etc. to move. So if that signal, and so your reaction times are slower, your movement and coordination can be off. Your research at the moment is what are the optimal blood glucose levels for people playing esports, like Formula One drivers, where reaction time is everything, and boxers as well, actually. But you can apply that in kind of any setting where rapid, coordinated movement is really important for maximal force.
Okay, and why high blood sugar? Because, weightlifters snack on lollies, powerlifters snack on lollies also while they're competing. So could that be detrimental, and how?
Same for most things. There's kind of an optimal window where you can have too much of a good thing. I will say that I've never actually come across a weightlifter with too high blood glucose in this scenario. That's more a theoretical, particularly if individuals have made weight by reducing carbohydrate intake. It's much more likely that they're going to have low blood glucose rather than high blood glucose, particularly you've only got your out window, adrenaline has played in on top, you've already lifted, depending, and again, it does depend how dependent you are in particular on glucose and how much you've managed to consume. But yeah, too much can also slow. Like high persistent blood glucose is suboptimal, as is low persistent blood glucose. So it's kind of like a working window.
All right, how about the belt?
Again, this is very much observational, but certainly if someone's belt is too tight, you're more likely to pass out because, again, you've got a huge amount of blood pressure pushing it down to your legs. It's not going to come back up as quickly, particularly with that rapid change in from being low to the ground to being high to the ground, which causes a lot of people to pass out anyway, because you get a temporary imbalance essentially in blood pressure. So if you're standing up, and you've essentially got an obstruction to your blood getting back up to your brain, it's potentially gonna not be good.
Okay, so we covered dehydration, blood pressure, low blood pressure, time, how long the person gets up from the clean, and glucose levels, and potentially the belt also. Anything else?
Potentially aerobic fitness as well. So which part of your aerobic system is your weakest part? So we don't often think about aerobic fitness when it comes to weightlifting. And it's not really about your absolute fitness. It's more about, so your aerobic fitness or the way your body can use oxygen in exercise is dependent on three things. How good you are at breathing in oxygen and getting that into your blood. So that's your uptake, so your like respiratory capacity. How good your heart is at pumping it around your body, and then how good your muscles are at using it. And even if you're the fittest person in the world, one of those three elements is why you're not even fitter. And theoretically, for example, from a dizziness perspective, and again, this is all very hypothetical, we're thinking very mechanistic. It is research we want to do, it's not research we've done. But theoretically, so if someone's weakness is their ability of their muscles to utilize oxygen, I wouldn't think that would impact dizziness, because that's not impacting the oxygen to your brain. Your muscles will feel like hell, and you probably will struggle if you've only got 2 minutes to get back if you're following yourself, but you're probably not going to get dizzy. I wouldn't expect anyway. But for example, if you're really bad at breathing in oxygen and all the oxygen you have had has just gone to your working muscles, you're gonna, even when you stand up from the clean, breathing in with the barbell sat there, you might not get enough oxygen in to keep your brain working and you might pass out. Or similarly, if we're thinking about that blood pressure piece, if your heart is relatively weak, then it might have trouble when you've just cleaned a heavy load, then you've stood up really quickly, particularly if your belt's tight, to pump enough blood to your brain to keep the oxygen there. So yeah, there is an intersection there between your aerobic fitness and potentially your physical capacity.
Could we just touch on how to potentially train these three components for weightlifters? So very specifically, the minimal required dose that every weightlifter should consider, how we would think about that.
Yeah, so I think, and again, so you kind of first want to know where your limitation is, because you kind of don't want to be doing necessarily something for everything as a weightlifter, because you don't want to fatigue yourself in that regards to the detriment of your weightlifting. And also, you will get some energetic system training just from doing the training you're doing. So it's not about improving your overall fitness by that much, but it's making sure you do have that top end, because in your training every day, you're not maxing out, I hope. So, you need to be able to max out and have the energetic systems to do that and to recover between sets. So, and between training sessions. So I would say, if you're like, you know what, I'm just unfit, like my heart's not great, like I know I'm just not a fit person outside weightlifting, then I would say, probably the thing you should do is just some low intensity exercise once a week. So maybe 20 to 30 minutes of exercise where you could still hold a conversation. Like it's that gentle. And what we're looking for here when we're doing aerobic training for weightlifters is, how can we put some stress on, in this case, the cardiovascular system with minimal stress on trunk, arms and legs. So the two modalities that I would typically recommend weightlifters use, you don't need to use both, one or the other, would be an echo bike or an assault bike. So the bikes where you're using your arms and legs, or swimming. The reason being, your heart is having to work to power all four limbs, but each of those limbs doesn't, relatively speaking, have to do much work because they're all contributing a little bit to the stress on the heart. Whereas, say, for example, if you're just on a stationary bike, so your arms aren't working, well, you've only got two legs that have to create enough stress on the heart, so they have to work relatively harder. Whereas if you've got that workload spread between arms and legs, they don't have to work as hard. So yeah, I always recommend things that use four limbs. I do not recommend running for weightlifters. Like, poor knees anyway. Add on running on top. Not usually a great idea.
Rowing.
So the flexion and extension on the back, I think, is for most weightlifters, particularly if you're strong enough to be competitive. I think the load on the back is problematic there. Even if you've got good technique, I just think that flexion and extension on the back is potentially problematic when you're then sort of using your back for sort of all your lifting as well. Theoretically, yes, though. Theoretically, a great way to stress out the heart. But yeah, I just think that the stress on the back is usually a bit too much.
Awesome.
If your limitation is more likely respiratory, so your ability to get oxygen kind of into the blood, that's kind of yucky sub-threshold intervals. So kind of 4 sets, 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off, with different intensities depending how fit you are and kind of where you are at in sort of a cycle of that training. But it's those kind of, it's the sub-threshold intervals. And there you definitely want to be doing it probably on an echo bike or an assault bike, because that's going to have relatively the least fatiguing impact on the limbs. But you definitely, when you do something like that, you definitely need to consider that in terms of, is this going to have a detrimental impact on my training? Can I actually recover from it? What's the sort of relative benefit? Whereas with the zone 2 stuff, you're fine. Like, you're not doing sort of, Ironman 2 hours on the bike. You're doing 20 to 30 minutes. Like, you'll be fine. Do that and go for a long walk every day and you're fine. It's not going to detrimentally impact. It's probably going to just improve your recovery by getting more blood flow around the body. But those sub-threshold intervals, you do need to think a bit more intelligently about it. Like, I wouldn't say come in the morning, do those intervals, and then this afternoon do whatever your technical lifting is, followed by a load of heavy squats and pulls. Like, that's asking for sort of face first, asleep for 3 days afterwards, hobbling along. So you've got to be a bit strategic about that.
So how would you place it in the training program?
I would say do it on a recovery day. So ideally, say if you're lifting 5 days a week, have it on one of the other 2 days. And it's not, so I would say do it in the morning of that day, because then you've got probably at least 24 hours if you're doing your lifting session the next morning to kind of recover from it. It's not so much of a problem, the fact that you might have lifted last night or whatever, but sort of doing it that morning so you've then got a day to recover is probably, and also so that then later in the day, if you do recovery activities, you can go and do your, I don't know, sauna or whatever it is, gentle walk in the sun to make you happy, that sort of thing. You can do that later that day.
What do you think about adding it after the session before the rest day? So would that be something to consider?
It would. I think that would definitely be an individual discussion. So the things it would depend on would be, how fatigued are you after your session? So can you actually hit the stimulus required in those intervals? Placing like the zone 2 or whatever, the easy stuff after a session, that's no problem. But with the intervals, can you actually do them? And so that's one thing. Can you do them? The other thing to consider is, can you then recover from that increased load? So, you can kind of be like, well, now I've kind of got it all out the way. I've got 36 hours to recover, but stress isn't kind of linear in terms of training. Like, if you kind of tip someone over the edge, it takes a proportionally a lot more to like recover from. So can they recover from it? And kind of closely linked to that, will they essentially not get maximal benefit from their training session because they've added another stress on top, which has meant their body's just gone, oh hell no, essentially. And you kind of it almost ignores that stimulus from training in terms of the recovery and adaptation. So yeah, if someone is like super young and bouncy and seems to be able to like kill themselves every day and still recover and accelerate in their progression faster than you would ever think. That person probably doesn't need the subthyroid shoulder. Say they did, you could probably shove it at the end of a training session. But I would say the more advanced you are, the more you need to prioritize recovery, the more value you'll probably get from splitting it.
Awesome. Anything for the muscles?
So the muscle utilization, yes. So I say whether you need to address that or not, that's going to be at least, and again, this is very what we assume, not what we know, if we can know anything about exercise. But what I would assume with, and what, my theory that again, hopefully we'll properly test one day in some robust research. But my theory would be the muscle utilization, if that's an issue that you have, the time you would address that or need to address it would be if it seems to be impairing your capacity within a session. So what I mean by that is, can you recover between sets? Because your ability of your muscles to use oxygen is essentially how you can do one set and then hit another set rather than just looking at the bar and not being able to lift it on sort of set 2 or 3, because ultimately all movement is aerobic. It might not be aerobic in the minute, lifting is not aerobic during the lift. That it needs way too much energy way too quickly. The aerobic system doesn't do that. It's anaerobic. But to recover from the anaerobic effort needs oxygen. So you do a set, the set will become aerobic if you're doing like 10 to 15 reps, but weightlifters, not bodybuilders. Say you do sort of 1, 2, 3 reps. That's not really going to be hugely in the moment aerobic, relatively speaking. But if you want to do that 1, 2, 3 reps again, your muscles need to recover between the sets, and that is aerobic. So potentially, if your muscle utilization of oxygen is poor, you might need to address it to recover. I'm not actually sure in reality how often you might see that, because the training you do will also train your muscles' ability to use oxygen between sets. So you kind of build that with your fitness. I would say that's probably, there will be some individuals out there. There's a couple of people I've seen who I suspect it might be the case in. But to a degree, your weightlifting training kind of trains that. And I would say if you do feel like you struggle to recover between sets, then whether it's that or whether it's something like your anaerobic, like your glycolytic capacity isn't great or whatever, actually maybe it would improve if you just introduce some EMOMs rather than doing, cardio per se. That might be enough of a stimulus to get what you need for weightlifting. But I'm not sure in that regards. Definitely need to do some more playing to figure that out for sure. But I would say, something like an EMOMs and things like that, which are going to get people probably more anaerobically robust, and potentially that recovery muscle utilization piece as well.
Anything with nutrition? We didn't even touch food yet, but would you have something to add with nutrition?
So I mean, I would say it's obviously on the dizziness side, always be hydrated. Dizziness aside, hydration's actually really, really important to force production, so power. So you need to be hydrated to lift well, and lift well consistently, in whether it's training or whether it's competition. So hydration should always be a focus. Carbohydrates, because they are the fuel for lifting heavy or lifting repeatedly, because your body needs energy fast. The only thing that produces energy fast is carbohydrates. And so you need to eat sufficient carbohydrates, and sufficient carbohydrates plays into all those energy systems as well, because it will allow you to push as hard as you can in training, or as hard as you need to in training. You push as hard as you need to in training, everything improves, assuming you recover and adapt. So they're really important sort of in that regard. When we're thinking specifically about some of these limitations, I would say there might be a scenario where if someone is, for example, delivery limited, so they're that classic, what you might call less fit person, maybe nitrate supplementation is of benefit to them. We haven't really looked at that specifically in the context of lifting. We have looked at it a little bit in the context of strength development, and it does seem to have a role, but nitrate supplementation might help someone to get more oxygen around their body during exercise.
What is the mechanism?
So it can cause aids vasodilation. So it's like widening of the blood vessels. So if your heart's not great at pushing blood around really quickly, at least if you've got wider vessels in the working muscles, what is going around, you're going to get more filling it. But there's still a lot of debate around how, if you're well trained, nitrates can't do more than your body can already do. And so I'm not sure where that might fall into the spectrum for a weightlifter in that respect. And no one's really looked at it. And it's not something I use regularly with individuals, if I'm honest. I do get them to eat foods with nitrates in, but it's not really specifically for that purpose. It's just because great for health more broadly. But it could be something that if someone wants to try, play with it, see how you get on kind of thing. If you are using a nitrate supplement, don't use one if you use antibacterial mouthwash, because then it won't work. You need the bacteria in your mouth to act on the nitrates. I would say, yeah, sufficient hydration, sufficient carbohydrates. And then more broadly, I mean, the first principle of sports nutrition for anything is health. So, your body works best. It will train harder. It will certainly recover better if you are healthy and robust. Getting fitter, faster, stronger relies on the immune system. The immune system is kind of the reflection in a way of, body health. So eat enough protein, eat enough calories overall, get 5 colors of fruit and veg in, eat some oily fish, eat some stuff with iron in, eat some stuff with calcium, which sounds like a lot, but to be honest, it's just eat a variety of food with different colors and don't stress too much about it. You'll be fine. Not always easy, but it's quite simple.
What we see most often is the maximal effort would bring the blackout in weightlifter, which happens at the competitions. And what also happens is for the competition is regulation or manipulation of weight. So athletes go up or go down specifically for that competition, and then they try. So this is stress, and then they try to double the stress by maxing out or going close to that level. How now this process of cutting weight, and of course there are many ways and many timelines. So how should we navigate and understand that in the context of the risk for an athlete of blacking out?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is to establish, is an individual someone who's likely to pass out. So what will inform that is, have they done it before? Do they find they black out in training, or have they blacked out in competition before? So okay, they might be someone at high risk. And you can also, just when they're lifting in training, this is obviously requires a little bit more equipment and someone to assess you, but you can look at things like hydration status, you can measure those parameters of fitness, you can look at blood pressure, you can look at circulating oxygen after a lift, like using a pulse oximeter, and you can look at muscle oxygenation. It's technical, it requires kit, but it's what we can do with competitive athletes. So you can profile someone and essentially estimate their risk. And you can say, well, okay, you might not have passed out now, but looking at this, if you get much stronger, we think you probably will. So let's address it. So you can forecast. And again, this is all very preliminary because we're still figuring it all out. But yeah, so you can profile someone, and or you just use past experience. Like, yeah, you passed out 5 out of the last 6 of your final clean and jerks. It's a problem kind of thing. And then if you've sort of assessed someone, or you've got evidence that it's a problem for you, then yeah, the next question is, okay, well, how do we address it? So ideally, I'm going to take away all the super technical equipment, because I appreciate a lot of people won't have access to someone who can do all that testing with them.
So we have a lifter who definitely has a problem. Now, how are we going about deciding which parameters to manipulate and how?
Yeah. So if someone you've got evidence that they do pass out, then the first things I look at are, we will talk a little bit about equipment actually you can use. So I'll look at blood pressure immediately after moderate to heavy lifts. I'll look at circulating oxygen immediately and after heavy lifts, look at blood glucose, and look at hydration status. If you don't have the kit to do that, what I would say is look at hydration status. When was the last time you peed, and what color was it? Hopefully it was in session and very light, and hopefully it's like that in competition. Then I'd also look at someone's diet and be like, is it likely that they're eating enough carbohydrates in and around training? And obviously in a competition setting, what do you normally do after weigh-in? And what's your weight making process? So you can kind of estimate, okay, well, this is how many carbohydrates you've actually got available to you. Do we think that's enough to lift? Then with that information, I can be like, right, okay, your blood pressure looks normal. Cool. Circulating oxygen looks normal. Fine. Oh, you're dehydrated. Right. We need to get a lot more water and salt in you after you weigh in. blood glucose low, borderline, we need to get more carbohydrates in you. Like I say, I do that with testing, but if you've got an athlete and you're like, well, I can't do all this testing, my first thing would be whatever they're doing, hydration and carbohydrate wise, post weigh-in, do more. And obviously, if someone is really susceptible to it, then, and they do have to cut weight for competition, then it's going to be a case of, you know what, we've whacked up. If we put any more fluid or carbohydrate in you post weigh-in, you're going to vomit. The minute you do a heavy clean, cool. Yeah, sorry. If you're making weight by dehydration and carbohydrates, this isn't going to work. You need to find another way. You need to use other strategies to make weight, because we just can't get enough back in you post weigh-in in order for you to actually be able to perform. Like, the body can only absorb fluid and salt and carbohydrates at a certain rate, and you've only got what, 2.5, 3 hours between weigh-in and, like, you know, your last clean and jerk.
Could we just go back? How do you measure glucose and hydration when you're using a kit?
So hydration, and I will caveat this because you need to know what someone has drunk and how much salt they've had, in that we look at urine specific gravity. So you can essentially, you pee on a stick and what color does it go? You can buy these bananas for like a tenner or something like that, but it can be manipulated. So for example, if I down 1.5 liters of water and I pee, it will look like I'm really hydrated. I'm not. I just drank so much water that my body just flushed it immediately out. So you do need to make sure someone hasn't done that and they've just drunk steadily over the course of the day, and they have added salt to food or had electrolytes in their water, because you need salt to retain water as well. Like, hydration is water plus salt. But yeah, so we look at someone's urine specific gravity, which is an indicator of hydration state, which essentially equates to how dark is your pee. And then blood glucose, you can do finger prick blood glucose. So just like a drop of blood, see how much glucose is in there. Or you can also use continuous glucose monitors. So I do that because you might see, so diabetics, type 1 diabetics in particular, use them, where it's essentially a monitor that just goes into the sort of the fluid around the cells, the plasma around the cells. So it's not quite blood glucose, but it's a proxy for blood glucose, and you're monitoring someone's blood glucose continuously. But that's more specialist kit.
Okay, and in terms of post weigh-in, what is your protocol? Would you go electrolytes first, then food, where the caffeine goes with it, how all this plays?
Yeah, so generally, and this is, I mean, dizziness aside, just as kind of a best practice approach, and I would actually do this whether you've made weight using any dehydration or carbohydrate tactics or not, because like I said, it's competition. You want to be maximally hydrated, you want to be maximally fueled, get in the max your body can handle, regardless of whether you need it because you've, I don't know, not drunk in 6 hours or 24 hours. It'd be a terrible idea with a 2-hour weigh-in, or whether you've been sipping water happily all morning. So, but particularly if someone's dehydrated, we would give a slightly hypotonic. So hypotonic means a fluid that's got some salt in, but not quite as much, not quite as concentrated as the body's fluid. So if you're doing it like yourself, essentially get some electrolytes, whatever dosage it says, you know, where it's like 1 tablet per 500 mils, cool, do 1 tablet per 750 mils. So just make it a bit weaker. So I would make up 1 liter with slightly less than recommended electrolytes and 60 to 80 grams of carbohydrates in there, carb powder. That'll usually get your electrolytes in there as well, or just chuck sugar in or honey or whatever. 600 mils of that in the first 15 minutes post weigh-in, the remaining 400 mils over the next 45 minutes. So you're getting hydration in, you're getting carbohydrates in. Then about 30 minutes after weigh-in, so once you've had the first chunk of that drink and when you're sipping the rest, I would typically eat 1 to 1.5 grams per kilo of carbohydrate containing stuff. And you want it to be low fiber so it digests quickly. So something like white bagel with jam and a banana, a bowl of oatmeal, a bowl of Cocoa Pops, however many squares bars, like Rice Krispie Squares bars or whatever, cereal bars, whatever it might be. But you don't want fat, you don't want protein. Neither of those are any use to you. You want carbohydrates, just carbohydrates. Protein will do nothing for you lifting on the platform. It might stop you being as sore tomorrow, but I don't really care how sore you are tomorrow. I care how you compete today. So fine. You don't need to go to the gym the day after a competition and train. So you might want to, but probably don't need to. So just carbohydrates. And then what I would say is, as you're warming up, just if you can, maybe have another 30, 40 grams of carbohydrates before you go out for your first snatch. And again, keep sipping fluids after that first hour as well. Between every moderate to heavy.
Sorry, after the slither is done, so within the first 45 minutes and the first hour from the weigh-in, do athletes go into drinking water or eat double to be energy? How?
Not coffee. Oh, well, I'll come back to the caffeine. But yeah, so in terms of what fluid, this is where it does become a little bit person specific in terms of some people seem to work better with water. Some people work better continuing with an electrolyte containing drink. I would say test both, see what you do better on. Take both into the back room if you need to, and you're suddenly like, oh, actually, just do a little bit of water, a little bit of this. You could alternate. But that one is a little bit more person specific. So I would say trial it and find what works best for you. Ideally, you're drinking a litre per hour, but I would say don't do this amount of fluid in competition having never done it in training, because you will find most people don't drink that much in training, and you do need to get used to lifting with that amount of fluid in you, particularly in a clean. So make sure you train all this before. But yeah, ideally you're aiming for something like a litre per hour or at least 500 mils per hour after that first hour. And some people, again, will need more or less. And then,
will it depend on their body weight or on something else?
Not so much body weight. It does seem to depend. It will depend on sweat rate. It will depend on someone's hydration status before how dehydrated they were before weigh-in. It will depend on how much they can actually tolerate before they feel like they're just like swishing around on the insides. Yeah. And again, it will also depend on, from the dizziness perspective, how susceptible they are to getting dizzy or to getting kind of jelly legs. You need to have more if you are susceptible to that, and it does seem to be hydration related. So again, it's about finding almost, again, a bit like the blood glucose, like your window of performance. Where's enough for you versus what's too much? And some of those factors will play in, and then there's others, what I would call individual differences, that I can't tell you why. It's just that I know that she needs to have a massive gulp of water between each lift, and she could forget to drink the whole way through and seems to be fine. So, and I can't quite tell you why yet, so it does kind of vary person to person as well. So it's definitely one to test. Like, you definitely can't just go down a checklist and be like, yeah, okay, right, you need this much. There's kind of a black box at the bottom where I'm like, no, let's see. And what do you kind of need? And then, yeah, carb wise, like I say, if you can do something like a banana or a cereal bar during the warm up, that would be great as well, just for another little top up. And then and this is for snatch and clean and jerk, between every once you get to about moderate weight in the warm up, and also every time you come off the platform, you want to be having a little carbohydrate top up. So 1 to 2 jelly sweets, a glug of a carb drink, to just keep topping up what you need. You won't feel like you need it between the snatches, and you don't really need it for the snatches if you've done all the other carbs correctly beforehand. But what you're doing in the snatches is setting you up to make sure you've got enough energy for your last clean and jerk. So you need to be kind of consistent with that. And then between the snatch and the clean and jerk, depending how much time you have, which obviously competition, how strong both of your snatch versus clean and jerk is. If you're waiting around for a little while before you start to warm up your clean and jerk, again, if you can get in another banana or a cereal bar, fantastic. But otherwise, just hit straight back to those between your moderate to heavy lifts, getting some sugar or whatever of any form. Then coming back to the caffeine, my first question would be, do you need it in competition? Particularly, do you actually need it to snatch? If we think about that, obviously super, super technical, coordination, reaction time, precision. Obviously, it's important for both lifts, but the snatch, absolutely important. Adrenaline heightens kind of all those senses. And again, you can have too much of a good thing. Add caffeine on top of that, and suddenly you don't know where your arms and legs are, potentially. So more and more, I see people, and I do encourage people to try not having caffeine before the snatch. It doesn't always improve performance. It's sometimes to the detriment of performance. But you might benefit from it in the clean and jerk, where it's a little bit more of I just need force output. Great. In which case, have it, again, test for you exactly the optimal timing before lifting that it kicks in. But for most people, it's somewhere between 15 to 30 minutes. So maybe start drinking caffeine after your second snatch, or once your snatches are finished, depending how long you've got until you go out for your first clean and jerk. But yeah, I would say typically the thing I see people potentially do wrong the most is chug down a whole energy drink 15 minutes before they go out for their snatch, where they might get more benefit from moving it a little bit later. So it benefits them in the clean and jerk, but doesn't necessarily adversely impact them in the snatch. And again, it depends on how nervous you get and how reliant you are day to day on caffeine. Some people might be like, no, I really need it for my snatch, in which case, cool, go ahead.
Right, right. Would you say that routine is more important than having the perfect setup, or should you experiment and find the perfect setup first and then routine it into your...
A bit of both. I would say never try anything for the first time on comp day, or never try anything for the first time on an important comp day. You might want to use an actual competition to test some things because you're like, I just can't simulate that adrenaline sort of in a training setting. But yeah, definitely don't do it when you're like, I need this competition to qualify. I'm like, cool, do whatever you've always done. Like that with maybe a bit more fluid in carbs. But, don't change your routine too much. But I think both are important. And again, the relative importance is going to be different person to person, because if the routine is really, really important for someone's psychology going into competition, well, that's a huge, huge factor. Assuming they're not like eating nothing, not being like, completely off the wall nutrition wise, then that is really important for them. And again, some people are, for want of a better way, a bit more robust. Like what they do on comp day nutrition and hydration wise is sort of important, but as long as they get past a base threshold, they seem to be fine. Again, then if they're like, but I really, really love my routine, I'm like, cool, go with your routine. But again, yeah, if someone's having all these problems and you're like, this is clearly fueling related, then I don't care what your routine is, we're getting more stuff in you. You don't like to eat, no problem, we will find a way to get liquids in you, but you need to get something in. So I think both are important. Ideally, you have a routine that is based on the optimal fueling. So yeah, I would say trial and play with things in training as much as you can. If you kind of know what the theoretical gold standard is, like we've just spoken through, be like, cool, that's what I think I'm aiming for, more or less. What am I doing now? Where's the gap? Can I try and get closer to that in some heavy training sessions so that then I can use it in comp day when it is already trained in a bit of a routine?
Right, because it takes time to even think what I have to buy, what I have to bring with myself, when I have to take in what, and, line it up. It takes a bit of practice,
Yeah.
at least for some lifters.
Yeah, like honestly, like write it out on a sheet of paper and like literally stick it at the front of your warm-up platform or give it to your coach. Or, if you're like, I never remember to do this, make sure someone knows.
Yeah.
That can really help as well, because you don't want to be thinking about, oh, I need to eat this, I need to drink this. Like that is a distraction. So you either want it so embedded in what you do that it's automatic because you've practiced it in training so much, or, you've been doing this as your comp routine for the last 5-10 years, or have someone who can do the thinking for you. Because yeah, it's not going to be good for performance if you're coming off and being like, right, what do I need to eat and drink now? What do I need to, oh God, I've got to go out again, so you definitely want to, as far as possible, not be actively thinking about it. So yeah, written out and stuck on the floor, or like your coach is the one who's holding it for you. So you literally walk off the platform and they go eat, or whatever it might be. It can be really useful.
Okay, so there is lifter on the platform and they went on the first clean and jerk and they blacked out. So they passed out on the platform. They coming up, everything that seems to be fine. They are not injured in other way. Now, what can be done in these few minutes? Maybe the coach moved them up a few kilos, so they have maybe a few minutes to do something. What should be done?
Carbs and water, like glucose and water, like sugar and water, sugar, water, or salt. Yeah, I would get them to have big gulps of water, suck on jelly sweets. The reason I say suck for about 10 seconds on a sweet, and then before you actually eat it, is because you can get an additional brain activation from glucose in your mouth, but it needs to be in there for about 10 seconds. So we think it only really works on glucose. So if you're having dried fruit as you're between lifts, just eat that. But if you've got sweets, suck on them first. Or if you're drinking a carb drink, swill it around your mouth for 10 seconds before swallowing it. But yeah, carbohydrates, fluids, don't gulp them. Do have one gulp and then just keep sipping it in the minutes you've got, rather than just multiple gulps. And yeah, steady intake of carbohydrates. but of both, not to the point where you're then like, I'm going to be sick.
Anything we can do for shifting fluids?
Not really. No, yeah, you just need to get fluids in. Yeah, their heart rate's going to be high, so it's not as though you want them to keep walking round to kind of keep their heart rate up. Their heart rate is going to be high because they've just passed out and now feel pressure to lift again. So their blood is moving around the body as good as it can at that point. It's probably more about calming it down, actually. What you don't want someone to do, actually, that does make me think, what you don't want someone to do is hyperventilate. Hyperventilation reduces the oxygen availability to the brain. So you want to keep someone as calm as possible. Like, say their heart rate will be high enough. Actually, you probably want to just calm them down. Just be like, deep breath in, steady breath out, deep breath in, steady breath out. You want to avoid them because that will pass out on the next lift. They might pass out before they lift. Yeah, so avoid hyperventilation at all costs.
Maybe loosen the belt just for them to relax
Yeah,
a little bit.
yeah, definitely loosen the belt off the platform. Yeah. 100%.
Are there any cases you would say this lifter shouldn't go back?
They're not injured. Yeah, if they're fine. I mean, I think if there was a kind of a hydration reason for them not to go out, it would have manifested even before their snatch at weigh-in. So I would say I can't think of a situation aside from actually we think this person has a heart issue, sort of a doctor involvement where we think there's a medical issue, that if they just passed out because haven't drunk enough and they have injured themselves, do what you can. Let's see if they can go out and lift again.
All right. And how the medical problem you mentioned, how that would manifest itself. So what coaches have to pay attention to?
Does someone know where they are? Do they seem to be having like some sort of arrhythmia? That someone will always, if someone has passed out, they should be checked out by the medic who's, by the platform if they're in a sort of a major competition, and they'll do their relevant medical assessments. But yeah, you'd sort of, if you're like someone is not okay, get a medic to check them over. Yeah, if they don't seem to kind of know what's going on, if their heart rate is all over the place or is like really, really high and you're like, it's been 20 seconds since they passed out, why is their heart rate really, really high? Like, if you're in any way, shape or form worried, get a medic to look at them, because if there is a problem, you don't want it to have missed it. And obviously none of us have the qualifications to be like, oh, you're fine, go back out there. You want someone who knows what they're looking at to sort of see them.
So let's bring it all together. What would be your advice for coaches and athletes in Olympic weightlifting in terms of, I don't know how to call it, managing lifters so that blackout is less likely to happen?
Stay hydrated, eat a lot of carbs, maintain some level of physical fitness and activity outside your sport.
To the point.
Yeah.
All right, 2 short questions to finish. The first one is, what is your favorite lift?
I am not a weightlifter. No one will ever see me snatch or clean and jerk again because it would be embarrassing and I will lose all professional respect people have for me. So my favorite lift would probably be, I think I would say, probably an RDL. Anything with a hinge. Anything with a hinge where I don't have to bend any limbs. That's probably my ideal lift.
Awesome. And where people can find you if they want to get in touch, need help, or want to ask a question?
Yeah, probably the easiest way is Instagram. So my Instagram is @sinead.feedfuelperforms. So yeah, I'm on them most days, and yeah, very accessible from there. And I do look at messages. So yeah, if anyone's ever got a question, feel free to reach out. Always love talking about these things.
Awesome. Thank you so much for today. It was a pleasure.
No, thank you for having me.